Hey there.
Hey, it worked. Did you tell the AP people to use their own Zoom account to get into it and just put in the meeting ID and passcode?
I did not. I sent them an invite via Zoom.
It's not going to work because they don't have a Kennesaw. Even with me, I have a Kennesaw account, but I found that it doesn't work for some reason.
Right.
Suggested them that they go into their own Zoom account and just join a meeting, and then just put in the meeting ID and passcode, and they'll get in. But for some reason, if you're not on campus, that campus link just doesn't seem to work. That's why.
You're saying log in to their own Zoom account and use the meeting number and passcode.
Yeah, use the join a meeting link on their own Zoom account, and then use the meeting ID and passcode for this meeting, and they'll be able to get in. But that's why they've had, I think Jeremy's had to use the mobile number to get in, because I think if you're not on campus, that Zoom link doesn't seem to work very well. I've never been able to make it work. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm writing him right now to let him know.
That way is a surefire way for them to get in. No point in them getting frustrated, trying to figure out how to get in. I'm excited about that tax break bill.
I was reading that quickly and it's like, how is that going to affect me? I need to go back and read this more closely.
Well, it'll affect you if you got money from the feds last year, and if you made any charitable donations.
I made some charitable donations with our move, but I didn't get any money from the feds, unfortunately. But my mom did, and that will help her probably.
Yeah, I didn't either. Jan and I took too much money out of our IRAs last year, so we had our overall income was too high to qualify, and that's okay. But we did make some charitable donations, and it's usually it's a percentage of the donations that are deductible this time. Now it's going to be 100%. So that's good. But that's true on the federal level. I don't live in Georgia anymore, so the Georgia deduction doesn't benefit me. But what the guy was saying was all they were doing is making the Georgia tax code match the federal tax code, so that so you won't have to pay Georgia income tax on the things that you're not going to have to pay federal income tax on either. But still, that's significant.
I haven't paid state tax in a long time. That's not going to be fun this year.
What is it?
I haven't paid state tax in 20 years.
That's right, Florida. Well, it's not as hard as it's going to be. You definitely need to deal with. I would suggest going to, a tax expert then, and not trying. But my husband's always handled our taxes. God knows I told him he can't die before me. I'll be screwed. Because before I met Jan, my father always did my taxes. I've never done taxes in my whole life. I've just signed the form.
We had an accountant even in Florida for years and years and years, as did my mother. Well, my dad did a lot of my father did all of the taxes for my mother until he died last year. And so I've been working with her with all her investments and her retirement. And it's, there's a lot. And
I know. Well, my husband owned a business. And and it was a C Corp, which meant that any profit from the business became our income. So it was really complicated. And he had a CPA. In fact, we still use the CPA to handle our taxes. And but he also was the one who gathered all the information that had to go to the CPA, and he'd just tell me what to give him, and I would give it to him, and he would deal with it, you know.
That's my approach this year. Is I'm gonna use my mom's CPA that handled all of their stuff and their trust, and just told them that, listen, I'm going to be managing this for the rest of my mom's life, so just mix it in with ours and just do it, you know, do everything.
There's this I like to listen to the comedy channels on Sirius, and there's this one comedian talking about showing up at her CPA's office with a grocery bag full of receipts. That would be me, you know. Just put everything in a grocery bag and here, do something with them.
My mother is quite fastidious. She has all of her receipts organized, alphabetized, numerical, color coded, you know, and just looks at me like, you don't? Mm-hmm. Like, no, I actually have a day job, Mom, and I realized that your job was to help Dad be organized, but I don't have one of those. My wife works all day also.
Yeah. Well, at one point, I remember I was saving every stupid bill I ever paid. And for years, I had all the electrical bills, all the telephone bills, and all this stuff. And I realized that at one point, you don't need to save those things, you know. And you know, maybe last month's you can save just to prove you pay, you know, but you don't need years and years and years worth of it, you know. Yeah. So I finally got to the point where I was throwing some of that stuff away, but because I did pay the bills, you know. I mean,
it's all online, and I try to tell my mother, she's, you know, she grew up in an analog world, and she just doesn't, she's not comfortable with the digital stuff. But, you know, to my aunt's point yesterday, I mean, she lost everything she owns, every paper document, every photograph, everything. I mean, she has nothing left. And so, you know, it's all, everything she needs is going to be online. Ironically, she needed her homeowner's policy, and even that's all online, but she had never gone to establish it. So she had a box of old policies in the garage, the upstairs loft above the garage, and that melted the front, but it didn't burn down the garage. And so my wife was able to go up and pull this 12-year-old insurance policy out so she could get her account number, so then they could start the process of finding out how much she had coverage and everything else.
Oh my.
But she didn't need that. I mean, they called Travelers, and I mean, they knew who she was. They knew
her name of the company. She was okay. Yeah. Oh my, the poor lady. I thought about her all day yesterday, thinking, oh God, if that happened to me, well, we do have a fireproof safe that we have passports and birth certificates and that sort of information in, so that if the house did burn down, we would at least have that kind of important information in the fireproof safe.
I don't know if, I don't think our aunt had anything fireproof, and I don't know where, she must have lost all that stuff too. I mean, she's 83, she lives alone, she's got two sisters in Kentucky, but you know, she has her retirement income, and I know that stuff's all online, and she knows where those people are, and she's actually probably going to end up making out pretty well because her house is inside the perimeter near Emory in Atlanta.
Yeah, so she'll get. Yeah, is she going to try and rebuild or just get an apartment?
I think what she was already planning to move in with family in the next couple of years, so that, you know, she spends her final years not living alone. And she had back surgery last year, which she kind of upped her move out date, you know, from 5 years to maybe 2 years to 3 years. And I think she's just realized, after talking with, you know, some family who also are adjusters, saying she might be better off to just take the claim, sell the property as is, and walk away.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Because otherwise she would rebuild it and just sell it. And if you really want to deal with the headache of all that, because the property's prime. So you know, there'll be a ton of investors come in to say, we want it, we'll strip this down, and you know.
And they were probably going to raise the building anyway and build something new. Yeah. So, yeah, that'll be, but still, that's such a trauma anyway, to lose everything like that. Of course, now she doesn't have to worry about getting rid of stuff. Well, downsizing is done.
family actually said that she's a bit of a hoarder. Well, not a bit. She is a hoarder. And so she had decades of junk, just decades of it. And everybody's kind of like, wow, we dodged a bullet there.
Yeah, downsizing is done. Yeah, I'm working with a girlfriend of mine, a lifelong friend who has congestive heart failure, and she's getting ready to move into an assisted living facility. And there's the issue of cleaning out her house and selling it. And I don't even want to face it, you know. It's, but anyway, so let's get ready for the meeting. Starts in 4 minutes. Hey, Kate.
Here we got Kate, and is that Jeremy that came in at 7:06?
This is John.
Oh,
John. Hey, John. Can't you fix
Hi,
this?
how you doing?
It has your name instead of your phone number.
You know, I'm not sure, and Zoom has given me just like a boatload of difficulties, which is why I end up calling in, but I'll try to figure that out for next time.
Hey, John, are you using your phone or your computer?
I'm using my phone.
Your phone. It seems like
I'd use. Sorry, go ahead.
There you go. There's your name.
I fixed it.
Oh.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Gary, you did that. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah. Cool.
Our guests won't have any problems coming in, but hopefully y'all did a little bit of research on our esteemed guests today.
I didn't. Tell me what I need to know.
Well, Kate,
yeah, I didn't either.
I put some links in our Slack channel, so please go in and look at those quickly so you know who's coming in. It's Jeff Van Anglin, or Jem Van Anglin, and Jeff Ami from the Associated Press.
Okay, this is in the Fresh Take Georgia channel.
And I will just say, like, I bring these people here.
Oh, I see it. I got it. Sorry.
So, you know, students need to be making sure that they do some background on these folks before we bring them in. They can make or break your next opportunities.
I am looking at them now. We got 4 minutes before they get here. New Hampshire. Okay.
Burton can't get in. That's weird. How did you get in with that passcode?
That's odd.
It was right there with the link.
Yeah.
Carolyn, did you use this? Let's see, who's that?
Let me see which one I used. I used the one that was on the invitation, whatever that was.
Yeah, I noticed it was different. It's kind of been the same.
XRXK88, with the X being the first X being the only lowercase.
Well, that's not the one I shared with AP.
Well, they ain't gonna get in.
I saw it in the Slack notice. Let me.
Yeah. Here, this is what you posted. Here, I put it on Fresh Take Georgia.
That's where I found it. Was
Yeah.
on Fresh Take Georgia.
That was in the invitation. That's what you should give the AP people. And that's what I used to get in.
Where are you at, Carolyn? So, okay. I'll send that to him.
Hey, Gary, just to let you know, I've got a committee meeting that starts in a half an hour for the digital media position. So,
okay, thank you.
Dr. Speakman, can you hear me? This is Gwinnett. Your Addison's most recent story just went up, surgical smoke.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great story. I edited it too. So is it online, Gwinnett?
It is.
Yay.
And I don't know, Kelly had another meeting she had to run to at 1:30, so I don't know that the social med's gone out about it yet, but it will.
There's Kelly. So everybody's coming in. Other than our guests, which means I probably gave them the wrong ones.
What else is there?
Or everybody else came into these.
And Jeremy's in the car driving to South Georgia, so he won't be on.
And I think Dason is here in person.
Howdy.
Hey, Dason, how are you?
I'm well. How's everybody?
Good. I think I gave our AP folks the wrong code. I'm totally baffled at how that happened now. Darian's, sounds like she's having trouble coming in. I think we're in our standing meeting and I created a new one for AP. Did y'all come into our regular meeting or the one that I posted in Fresh Take this afternoon?
I came in via the message about Fresh Take this afternoon.
Yeah. All right.
At 12:24.
Likewise.
In Fresh Take, Georgia. Sorry.
And Darian is trying to get in.
Yeah, she did the same thing I did because I typed it in. I went back and like made sure I had everything a couple of times and it still wouldn't let me in.
Yeah. So she's restarting. That's always the first option. Just restart and try again.
Well, while we're waiting, I'm going to keep monitoring my email here to see if AP reaches out. But I also sent them my cell. But do we have any order of business we need to take care of?
Oops.
Re-pitches, anything else?
Actually, while we're here, could we discuss just notifying myself and Tion when we have posts that are like ready to publish? I don't know if we have like a specific workflow for that.
Yeah, is that Kelly talking?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering who should I? I've been sending a message to Gwinnett, but that doesn't seem to be the right procedure to follow. Kelly, am I supposed to notify you when we have an article ready to publish? Is that the plan?
Yeah, that would be awesome if you guys could, once you or Gary or whoever has approved it, if you could just maybe Slack myself and Tion or me, just so we know. I know Addison Slacked us yesterday and it kind of got lost on the radar for me.
Okay.
But yeah, just because I think we had seen a few in the Google Drive earlier, but we weren't sure if they were like, if they had been updated and all that.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do I have to actually write on the article that it's ready to go, or can I just, when I finish editing it, share it with you with a message saying it's ready to go?
Yeah, I think that's totally fine.
Okay.
Sharing it with us.
Okay, that's what I'll do then.
Awesome, thank you.
Jeff,
Carolyn, I sent you that message earlier, or my student contacted you about that one today who's not part of the group. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I've already edited it, sent it back, and asked her some questions, and we're corresponding on it.
Good enough.
welcome, Jeff. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. I feel like I may have given Jim the wrong meeting code. Did you have any trouble getting in?
A little bit. I think we're both working through it now.
Okay. Well, we'll wait for him to join to get started, but thanks for joining us. And you probably see a whole bunch of Zoom boxes on here. This is our student reporters and our faculty editors. Here comes, well, one more student. And my name's Gary, and I'm the executive director of the Center for Sustainable Journalism, and really appreciate you taking some time out to meet with us today.
Well, you know, it's always good to hide out from the storm here in my Capitol office, my glamorous Capitol office with the dirty vent you can see behind me.
So you're downtown Atlanta right now?
Yes.
Well, I guess maybe while we're waiting on Jim to come in, I will just tell you, I'm not going to go ahead and introduce everybody individually. They've got their names up, et cetera. But I did want to point out a couple of our team leads here. We've got Carolyn Carlson, who is a longtime AP reporter from way back. She covered the legislature for 17 years.
Not quite that many years, but I recognize the office.
Well, maybe we'll walk out and see the portrait of Dick Pettis in the hall later.
Well, I worked with Dick. I was there when Dick was there. Yes.
Well, sadly I was here too late to meet the patron saint of Georgia Capitol AP reporters.
Then Carolyn went and while she was working on her doctorate, she served as lieutenant governor, the press secretary for the lieutenant governor, and then came into academia and taught here at Kennesaw for many years before she tried to retire, but we're working hard to prevent her from doing that. But we're grateful to have her on the team. We have Josh Azriel, who is here with a nice blue sky. He is one of our faculty mentors on the team and has really been leading our podcast efforts. We have Kelly Audette from the AJCs leading our audience engagement. And then we have Gwinnett Ryder Sinclair, who's our web developer. Everybody else on here is a student, and I know that they're going to come in with wonderful questions once we get to the Q&A part of this session today. Have you talked to Jim? Do you feel like he's stuck, or should we go ahead?
He just texted me to say he's, quote, almost there.
There he is. He should be popping up momentarily because I just let him in. Are you with us, Jim?
There we are. I solved technology, so
I think
it took a little bit.
Have inadvertently shared incorrect meeting numbers or got things crisscrossed. Did the first invite I sent you, was that a dead link?
No, it worked. It just wouldn't let me in. It gave me like the security stuff, and I had to figure out which passcode to use and all that. So it just took a little bit to navigate it.
Well, we appreciate you working through that. Apologies on our end. Kennesaw is working to make sure nobody can Zoom bomb us. So they put in this two-factor security, and if you don't have a Zoom account, it causes problems, et cetera. But we're happy to have you join us. I was just doing a bit of an intro for Jeff when he popped in, but we have some faculty and some team leads on here, some editors. Burton, I didn't mean to leave you out. We also have Burton Speakman on here, who's leading our capstone team, who's leading some of the digital reporters. I should say digital, they're actually all doing multimedia. But what we have here is a host of faculty and editors and web developers and audience engagement who are working with our students to report on the Georgia legislature, among many other things that you and I discussed a couple weeks ago, Jim. I've shared with the team a little bit about your backgrounds, and I'm really happy you brought Jeff in with you today. I wonder if you want to do just a quick intro of you and Jeff, and then we can start pelting you with questions about everything you do with the AP and down at the legislature, et cetera.
Okay, well, great. So I'm Jim Anglin. I'm the Deep South editor at the Associated Press. So I oversee all of our news operations in 5 southern states, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I've been with the AP, it'll be 10 years coming up in May. Before that, I worked at the Press Register newspaper in Mobile, Alabama. I grew up in New Hampshire. I worked at a bunch of newspapers up north. Get tired of the snow and the cold, so I decided to move south. So I actually was the Metro editor many, many years ago at the Athens Banner Herald. And then I moved to Mobile, and then I came to the AP. So that's my basic background. And like I said, I just kind of oversee anything that happens news-wise in those states is my responsibility. And that is across formats, text. I work with our photo people, our video people, all those different platforms. I also work with our national, we have a bunch of national teams on various topics. We have our Washington Bureau. We have, of course, the AP is a global news organization, so we have bureaus overseas that occasionally our reporters will work with them too. If it's a story that is, trying to think of an example, like we've had a lot of hurricanes to cover, unfortunately, in the last year. So we work a lot with our folks in Latin America. A lot of those storms coming from, they get them first and then they come to us. So that's the basics. Jeff, do you want to do your intro? I will let you give your background instead of me.
So Jim and I have worked together off and on for a long time because I also worked in Mobile for more than 10 years. Before that, I had worked in Anniston, Alabama for 2 years. After leaving Mobile, I went to work for the AP in Jackson, Mississippi, where I covered the legislature there. So I've actually covered legislatures in Alabama, Mississippi, and now Georgia. Some days I feel like I'm taking a degree in comparative legislating.
Huh. I have to ask, since you both worked in the Deep South for quite some time, especially with the AP for the last 10 years with you, Jim, did you happen to have the pleasure of working with the mullet?
Yes, absolutely. Dave Martin.
I covered many sidelines with Dave through the years, and he was quite the legend here in this area of the country. I figured when you said you'd been there 10 years, you had to cross paths.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, he was the photographer in Alabama when I joined the AP, and he actually taught me an awful lot about the AP. Wonderful photographer and great person. So
yeah, good guy. Give you the shirt. He'd give you his last roll of film, and then he'd go out and beat you.
Exactly.
I kind of saw this conversation going two ways today. We have two big goals I'd like to accomplish, one of which I'd like Jeff and you, Jim, to talk about covering the legislature. Obviously, Jeff, you've covered 3 different legislatures, so you probably have some keen insights as to how to start from scratch in a state that you've never covered before. The students on here, they're on week 7 now of knowing nothing about the legislature to producing a weekly podcast and starting to report digital stories on a weekly basis. And then I think I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the AP, talking about career opportunities, internship opportunities, how one might find themselves working for AP, what the job is like once you get into the AP, and then even more specifically, once we get to the point of content sharing, what the AP would be looking for as far as, story content, in order for it to move on the wire, some basics that you would want to look for as far as, a story pitch and, stories that you might decline and why, just so the students can get a little better idea of if I want to get a story out on the wire, what are the top 5 things I got to make sure that it accomplishes to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let Jeff take the first part because he's covered legislature a lot more than I have. So
if I was going to, when you walk into a state house on the first day of session, there are all of these people. And if it's your first day ever covering it, there are all these people you don't know. And the challenge in Georgia is even higher because there are 236 lawmakers, which is an unusually large number for a state legislature. There are 180 people in the House, and this is my second session. Unfortunately, I haven't developed flashcards. I don't know them all. My theory has always been that the best place to start is to try to develop some sort of niche, some sort of issue that you want to be the person who you want to be the reporter who knows more about than anything else. Because when the circus is not in town, my primary responsibility is education. That was sort of the first thing I camped out on as a niche here in Georgia. I also moved into covering the state budget because so much of education is tied up with how much money the schools are getting that it's hard to unlink the two subjects. You have to think about when you're covering the legislature, you have to think about the obvious people that you want to get to know are the lawmakers. So if you're picking a niche, you want to try to meet the chairman of the committee and meet the sort of the members who are prominent members of the committee. The Texas, and I borrow this term from Texas Monthly, in any legislature, there are members who are what are called furniture. All they do is sit there and gather dust. So the good news is that there are 236 people, but they're not all movers and shakers. But part of your task when you first show up is you've got to figure out who's the furniture and who matters. But beyond that, there is sort of the extended Capitol family. There are staffers. They're the people there are the lobbyists. In many cases, as a reporter, those people are your best sources, especially if you have lawmakers who are sort of hiding the ball from you. They don't want to, somebody's carrying a bill. Sometimes they'll level with you and tell you who the opponents are and what the faults of their bill are, but other times they won't. So you need to go find somebody else who will level with you about what the bill does, who's happy about it, who's mad about it, who's trying to make it happen. The other thing is you have to figure out what the flow is of your particular legislature. Here in Georgia, things are a little more a little more professionalized than in some other states. Like there are lots of public hearings here, which is not the case in some other states. But you have to sort of learn to read the tea leaves about what legislation is actually going somewhere and what legislation is not going somewhere. And I will be honest that here in Georgia, I am still learning to read those tea leaves. I've gotten better, but I am not an expert at it. Maybe I should stop there, or maybe you should ask me another question.
Well, I would say, that's a great point about dead on arrival legislation. We've really been trying to tell the students to avoid stories of bills that don't seem to be moving. And it's actually comforting to hear you say after years of experience covering legislatures that that's not a black and white easy thing to necessarily read when you're new to the Capitol in a new state.
I generally, and this is my own personal preference, I generally try to avoid what I call bill stories, i.e. so-and-so introduced a bill. But there are exceptions to that rule. I'll be honest, I'm writing what's close to a bill story today about a tax cut bill that got introduced yesterday that the Speaker of the House is behind, so it's obviously going somewhere. But I sort of especially because of the AP's mission, my general-ish rule is like, I want to see you get your bill up in committee before I'm going to write about it. If you can't get a hearing in Georgia, your bill's not going anywhere. Now, and again, there should be exceptions. You may want to write a story about how the legislature is just totally ignoring some important subject, like say Medicaid expansion. Now, no Medicaid expansion bills are ever going to get a hearing this year. But that doesn't mean if you want to write about, hey, the federal government is offering us all this money to do Medicaid expansion and we're ignoring it again, that you don't want to seek the sponsors of the bills that are going nowhere because presumably they're the ones who can. But you have to know, you need to always factor that question into your head. Like, are these bills going anywhere?
How has COVID changed the way you're working down at the Capitol? And what I mean by that is, has it changed your workflow as far as, tracking the daily happenings at the Capitol, or which committee hearings you might go to, or just how you go about your day to day?
I am getting less face-to-face time with lawmakers, which I regret. Most committee hearings I am watching online and not going in person. And that is in some cases because the room is so small that they're not allowing outsiders in. In other cases, the room looks so COVID-y that I kind of don't want to get involved. In the Senate, the press has been relegated to the upstairs gallery instead of sitting in desks at the back of the chamber, which really restricts my ability to sort of buttonhole a senator sort of just in the flow of things. It makes it harder to get a hold of people. In the House, we're still in our normal place, but they have the House split between 3 separate rooms, which also makes it harder to go run down any particular House member. The first thing you have to do is to figure out which room they're sitting in. So there is less face-to-face interaction, and that's a real problem, because in the general flow of things, sort of the quick impromptu interview in the hallway, also sort of, I will say that some things haven't changed. I am still trying to make a circuit every day of sort of important lobbyists who I want to talk to her out in the hallway and just sort of be like, hey, what's going on? But some lobbyists are actually not here because they feel the same way. They're also trying to avoid COVID. So some people I can only call on the phone because I don't see them face to face, and it really degrades your quality of interaction. So it makes it more difficult.
Presuming that your copy goes to Jim, and not to put you on the spot, but would you say that your stories have not been as strong this session because of the inability to have these face-to-face interactions?
What I worry about is not so much what's in the story and the weakness of the story, as opposed to what else am I not learning about and hearing. A lot of State House reporting, before you get to a story, first you have to get what the rumor is. And it's the inability to circulate face-to-face. That's what really retards. That's what's really retarded, is it's harder to gather sort of the gossip and the scuttlebutt. It's harder to get a sense of, because sometimes you can, sometimes you buttonhole a member, and then after you talk to them about whatever you want to talk to them about, you can say, what else is going on? Or like, is there anything else, some other bill you're mad about? Or, hey, have you heard about such and such? And you can still do that. But again, it's just not as easy. At home, I'll be honest, my wife is not super enthusiastic about me bringing COVID home. So I'm trying to sort of thread the middle line. Like the House press room here is sort of a glass tin fishbowl. And a lot of reporters are trying to stay away from the House press room unless it's important enough that you have to be there. Like, for example, crossover day, and I'm going to assume everybody knows what crossover day is coming sort of probably at the end of next week. And I expect I will be camped out in the House press room all day long that day, just because the flow of legislation is so fast, and the flow of like crazy rumor scheme being cooked up in the hall is so thick on those days that not being in person is a real, like, I'm not sure I could do it. Or I'm not sure I could do it right.
It's a great a great point to bring up. I'm sure the students are going to have some questions about crossover day, but I think maybe I'll open it up to some of our students to ask some questions about covering the legislature, et cetera, before we pivot over to Jim. Students, y'all got some questions?
I got one if no one else wants to.
I do.
I think we've got a nice queue. We've got Darian, Dason, Alexa, I saw we're all coming in. And then if others have, raise your hand and I'll get to you. We'll just move around the screen. Go ahead, Darian.
So basically when you first came to Georgia, how did you get comfortable really just like putting yourself into Congress with not really knowing anything, or not Congress, the legislature?
It was the first month to 6 weeks were profoundly uncomfortable. That I didn't, like everything from like, how do I get to the cafeteria to how do things work here? And I will be honest, I am still discovering some things. Some other reporters have showed me some things this year that I didn't know how to do. And I expect that I will continue to learn new things for several years. Because one of the things with legislatures is there are sorts of things that only happen like you get weird procedural things that may only happen once a year or once every couple of years. And so you'll watch something happen and you'll be like, what the heck was that? The best way that I knew how to do it was that I went and sought reporters who had worked here for years to basically ask them questions about things I knew I wanted to know about. Like I went across, like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's office is across the hall, and James Salzer, who is their reporter who covers the budget, is over there. And I went last year and I said, James, will you give me 30 minutes to explain how the budget works in Georgia? And he was nice enough to do that. And that was sort of my early like primer in, like how the budget works. That is everywhere that I have gone that I've started over in a legislature, I try to find people, and it's not always reporters. Sometimes it's other people, but people who have been there a long time and who know how things work. It's because it's a tribe that thrives on oral tradition. A lot of what you need to know is not really very clearly written down. So you have to find someone to tell you.
Okay. Thank you.
Jason, go ahead.
Well, now that you're all well endowed into your career, what's some bit of advice that you'd like to give to people in our position? People who are interning in our last few months of college, getting ready to, start either reporting on the Capitol or just our own endeavors. What's one thing that you've like really picked up on now that you kind of wished someone, headed you up on earlier?
I think the best advice I ever got when I was in J school, and it sounded crazy then, but it makes sense now, is that you should try to do 4 things a year that you're proud of. I can remember at the beginning where I was crazy proud of every story I wrote, but after a while, some of those things are not, you're like, I've done this 50 times before, so you're not crazy proud of it. And that is a way of trying to like make sure that I keep challenging myself, and trying to make sure that I keep learning new things. The other thing that I have learned is that when you're covering when you're choosing what stories you're going to cover, or when you're covering a story, that you should listen to your emotions. Particularly, I find that things that make me passionate or maybe angry are good stories to cover, because that is good fuel to push yourself through all the work that needs to be done to get a good story. Whereas if you start in on things that you just kind of don't care about, that your internal motivation may lag. If I find a story, if I find something and then like I read that and I was like, man, that pisses me off. Like, that is a good internal guide to, that is a story you need to do.
That's sound advice, Jeff. If something pisses you off, go after it. Alexa, you were coming in next?
Yeah, so I've been doing some stories on education this semester for our capstone class, and I was wondering if you had any advice for getting the community perspective, you know, how legislation is going to affect teachers, because they've been reluctant to talk to me on the record, I think for fear of being, you know, punished and whatnot. And obviously students, it's almost impossible to talk to students on the record.
I will be honest, when I moved to Georgia, I was surprised at how hard it was to get teachers to talk to me. It was a lot easier when I lived in Mississippi. Teachers here, I do believe, are, whether they should be or not, are afraid of retaliation for talking to reporters. One way to do it is to try to go through unions and teacher groups. Of the teacher groups, in terms of like finding a teacher to talk to, I find that the Georgia Association of Educators is the best. Page, the sort of the non-union group, is in some ways more on the ball than GAE, but they are not good in terms of like, find me a teacher to talk to. You know, it depends on if you are working, like, are you covering just like trying to do Cobb County, or like, do you have a school district that's a particular target?
No, it's more been framing, you know, some of the bills that are going through and how they would affect teachers in any of the major districts. And really I've expanded it because, you know, finding any one teacher is really hard.
I would be trying to mine for certain kinds of teacher affiliations. Like, there are like closed Facebook groups for basically anything under the sun. Yeah. So, you know, if you're like looking for science teachers or history teachers, you can find a closed Facebook group for that. You know, if you're looking, I don't think that's as effective a way to reach teachers by geography. But it is a good way to reach parents by geography. That you will find, you know, usually I try to sweet talk my way into a closed parents Facebook group and be like, I'm writing a story about X. If you'd like to talk to me, you know, this is how to get in touch with me. And a lot of times I will go through the Facebook group and find people who seem to have made comments on point to what I want to talk about and try to direct message them. That is a somewhat effective strategy. It doesn't always work, but it does sometimes.
I've done that a few times, and I'm glad to know it's not like an unethical thing to do.
Well, sometimes being a reporter verges on being a stalker.
Yeah.
It can get a little weird. Especially like in a closed Facebook group, usually I try to lay my cards on the table with the moderator before they let me in, and try to basically write a post saying, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. Some people still don't want to talk to you. Beyond that, for parents honestly are easier to find than teachers. You know, I'll try to like harvest like parent teacher association lists from schools that might be posted online. That's a good way to find a parent who'll talk to you. And sometimes the parents can lead you back to teachers. If you get a good parent, you can be like, is there a teacher who you can put me in touch with? Because all their kids have teachers. Did I answer your question? Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Addison, I think you're up next.
I have one question I was thinking about, but since you just said what you just said, I also kind of want to ask regarding the closed Facebook group situation, because I, for the last couple of stories, have tried to get into these groups and I got rejected a couple of times. So I was wondering if you had a specific pitch or a way to get into these groups.
Usually I try to write as nice an electronic message as I can. Sometimes maybe you can track down the phone number of the moderator. Sometimes people won't let you in. At which point you just got to kind of move on. If you're looking for people in a particular, and one thing I didn't say about parents, I learned this trick over the summer. The other great way to find parents is to go to a ballpark where there are youth sports practices. And they are sitting there watching their kids practice and they have nothing to do and they are a captive audience. But that is, sometimes you have to go, sometimes you can't do it online. Honestly, like in-person interviews are usually better anyway. It's just when you're needle in a haystacking it, trying to find people who fit the description of what you want, like going and standing out in the Walmart parking lot is sometimes not an effective way to do it. But if you can think of a place where those people, a public place where those people are going to be, I would say go stake out that public place.
And then my other question is, when you're, approaching just your average story, what is sort of your framework for who you want to hear from? Like, do you always want to make sure you hear from the involved lawmaker and then, a lobbyist and then a person who might be impacted? I mean, what's like your strategy as far as who you want to make sure is being heard for each story?
It depends on the nature of the story and the time. Like I have a story on The Wire today, which is sort of a nationwide look at school voucher pushes across multiple states. And that story leads with has an anecdotal lead with a parent. I felt like it was really important to have some parent voices in that story. Sometimes, a lot of times as a legislative reporter, you're moving so fast, at least what we do for the AP, you're moving so fast on a daily story that you don't have time to find someone who is affected, although sometimes those people will show up at hearings. If I can, I would always like to have a voice of a regular person. Generally I prefer the voices of lawmakers over lobbyists, unless I think the lobbyist has some particular, makes something special. Like I wrote a story earlier this year about a hearing where the executive director of the Georgia High School Association stood up and endorsed the Tim Tebow bill, which would let homeschool students play high school sports. And that was GHSA had never endorsed the bill before. So that was my lead, GHSA is endorsing the bill. But that's unusual. A lot of times my approach to lobbyists is that they are more a source of information and background, that they can lead you to people who are affected. That's not to say I quote plenty of sort of lobbyists and association people. A lot of times I fall back on the teachers groups as proxy voices for teachers when I am in a hurry. It's not as good, but it's what I got. So I think it depends. You have to know, but if I was writing a finely crafted feature, I would definitely want some real people in there.
That's good. Thank you, Jeff. I want to be mindful of our time. We could keep going on all things, storycraft, but I know Jim's time is probably tight. So I wonder, Jim, if you could kick us off a little bit about, careers in the AP, how you get there, the value of what these kids are doing to really set them up for their careers, and then maybe spend a little bit of time and talking. I mean, the end goal for almost everybody here is that they would love to get stories moving on the AP Wire and get the sort of exposure that I talked to you about a couple of weeks ago. If they were to, and maybe talk a little bit about what you would be looking for in those stories to consider a member submission story to move either to the Southeast or at least to the Georgia Wire.
Sure. I think the best place to start is to talk a little bit about the AP, because we were a little different than, a newspaper or a TV station or different media groups. So the AP, as you know, is a global news organization. We have bureaus on all continents except for Antarctica, although we do go there for stories occasionally, but we do not have a bureau there. We were the first Western news organization, for example, to have a bureau in North Korea. We have, I think it's over, don't hold me to this, but it's like 200 and maybe 260 bureaus around the world. So in the US, our world headquarters is in New York, but our US headquarters too is in New York. We have the US is broken up into 4 different regions. There's the East region based in New York, South in Atlanta, Central in Chicago, and the West in Phoenix. And there are teams of people across formats in each one of those regions. So that's, text, photo, video, audio. We have people that do social media, digital journalism, all that kind of stuff. We also, our business, right? Our business is to, we have members or customers, right? So we produce content on any of those formats, and we have contracts with people who basically buy that content, right? So we do that across all formats. Like I said, video is a huge business for us right now. That is kind of like one of our biggest growth areas. So that structure gets to the point of kind of how we approach the news, right? Which is what we're talking about today. And Jeff has heard me say this a million times. So when I talk to people about my reporters about stories, we have what's called the state wires, right? Which are like the Georgia wire, right? Which goes to, it's really geared specifically towards Georgia customers. And we have that in Alabama and Mississippi, Louisiana, and all 50 states. Well, except Delaware. But we have all 50 states pretty much. But then we have what's called the national wire, right? And the national wire is kind of the bigger, better stories, and the stories that have broader appeal, right? So if you're writing a story out of Georgia, why would somebody in Idaho care about that story, right? Like, or California or Vermont or wherever, or India or China or where, around the world. Some stories are apparent. They're national stories, right? Like the Georgia election that we just went through, right? Because there was such a high profile, national, global interest in the election that those stories, automatically pretty much go to the national wire, which effectively goes to around the world to different places. But specifically to the legislature, I always encourage my reporters to try to write stories that have broader appeal, right? To look for topics, story ideas, things that may reflect what's going on nationally. Like Jeff mentioned his story about vouchers and kind of how that, we use Georgia as an example to tell a broader story so that people around the country would be interested in that story. So I really do believe when you're covering the legislature that we try not to, at least at the AP, we try not to get into real micro kind of, real local interest. We want stories that are going to have bigger impact. We want impactful journalism, unique and distinctive, but also impactful journalism. And that is very, very important to us. So you have to kind of understand that structure to kind of understand what we kind of look for, as opposed to, let's say, your local newspaper who may be focused on just stories that are statewide or just stories that are of interest to a particular city or a particular, circulation area or broadcast area. We are really looking for stories that have impact and tell bigger, broader themes. So I always suggest in the legislature that my legislative reporters that before the session, we try to talk some, and it's like, what are the biggest threads or themes that we think are going to be important in the legislature? Now, sometimes that gets thrown off kilter because I had those conversations in probably December of 2019, and then this thing called COVID came along, and it just kind of, completely threw things, whatever, into a disarray. But typically, understanding, as getting to what Jeff said, is there's a whole bunch of bills that are out there that have no chance of going anywhere. It's like, what are the important threads and what are the important buckets, right, of stories? Like what are those thematically? Like what are those issues? And then how do we, cover those, right? And try to identify those, I think, is really important.
So, let's say, I got a two-part question here. I'm going to pivot to Jeff. Let's talk about your voucher story for a minute. If you're writing a voucher story for the National Wire that is, centered in Georgia, what other states did you source and why? How did you select which other states you used for context and comparison?
Well, at the AP, basically all of the sort of State House reporters are looped in a Slack channel. So when I started reporting this story, I was like, hey, is there voucher activity in your state this year? And is there something, especially, do you think there's some bills that have died every year before this year that are going to get across the finish line this year? Which allowed me to draw, so 9 or 10 different reporters answered me back something. And a couple of those, I was like, a couple of them were like, I can send you some quotes from somebody here. And so they did. So that was one way. I also talked to sort of advocates on both sides. It was difficult, and it was a difficult time to write the story because legislative sessions start at different times. Georgia starts not the earliest, but pretty early. So a lot of legislatures are just getting it in gear right now. But I came up with some examples and then quoted some national folks who were like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of activity this year because everybody, like lots of lawmakers have heard from parents who are unhappy with digital learning. And thus they're going to try to give their, be like, our solution is we'll let you go to private school because private schools are much more likely to be meeting in person in any given state. So that, it was kind of a typical, for that, it was a kind of typical reporting process. For other kinds of stories that might be based on statistical data, you would go where the numbers told you to go. Some stories beg to be written out of particular states because that's where the problem is worst or that's where the solution is best.
And that might not be Georgia, but you could then use that as a comparison to Georgia.
Right. Well, in that case, like as a Georgia reporter, I might not be the one writing the story. Either that or I would be sharing a byline with someone in that other state. Like I wrote a story in 2019 about a study about school districts that split off from larger school districts and how that enhanced segregation. And Georgia is not a good example of that because there haven't really been any school district border changes in forever. So I drove to a suburb of Montgomery, Alabama, and wrote the story from Pike Road, Alabama.
Okay.
I should say we do a lot of, especially our State House reporters, what we like to call feeds, right? That's what we do. A lot of what we do. We have, in addition to reporters who work in the states, right? We have we call them national beat teams, right? So there's a national education beat team, state government beat team, immigration beat team. There's a whole bunch of them. There's probably, I don't know how many, I can't remember. There's religion. There's like a whole slew of them. They have some national reporters that are assigned to those teams, but they work really closely with especially like the state government team with the State House reporters. And, we frequently will get, requests for like feeds, like they'll be doing some big national story and they'll be like, hey guys, what's going on in your state? Can you do this, whatever? Sometimes those are written by the national reporters, but sometimes they're written by folks like Jeff. And Jeff happens to be a member of the national education beat team at the AP as well as working in the Georgia State House. So we have folks like that too that are working a state house or just working a state. Like I have Kate Brumback, who's one of our reporters in Georgia. She's part of the national immigration beat team. She writes a lot about courts and cops and immigration. So there's a lot of that. And that is one of the great advantages of the AP, to kind of get back to what the AP is. We're the only news organization that has, a footprint in all 50 states in the United States. and we try to really leverage that. So that helps us, right? And it helps our customers, but I think it's a really good experience for reporters because you get to write, like I said, impactful journalism that is, you know, of a broader scope that takes on, you know, more complex and more issues with more depth. Not just in a vacuum, because nothing's in a vacuum anymore. I'm an old guy. When I started, things were in a vacuum. I'd write for a local newspaper. I'd write a story, you know, about the city council, whatever it may be, right? But the world's so much smaller now, and it's just getting smaller and smaller. And it, you know, Jeff will attest to this. I always say, I don't think legislators have very many original ideas. Like, if something's being proposed in the Georgia legislature, and it's a kind of a really big, like a big issue or something's really important, I will guarantee you it's being pitched in like 30 other states, right? I mean, it's all, you know what I mean? Like in some form, you know?
And oftentimes they're working off the same bill that some national interest group wrote and handed to them.
Right. They basically crafted the bill and they're just find somebody in each state legislature or whatever to carry it. So there's a lot of that kind of communication too, right? In
That
how
is, to circle back to legislative reporting, an old crusty legislator I knew once was fond of the phrase, "Who wants this?" And that whenever you're writing about a legislative proposal, getting to the bottom of that is often an important task because it is some sort of interest group that wants it. You know, it is. The part of Schoolhouse Rock you didn't see when I'm Just a Bill is that it's not the legislator who thought there should be a law, it's the interest group that thought there should be a law, wrote the proposal, and then handed it to the legislature.
Which would be
I'll
good.
tell you a great story about that. I'm sorry.
Please, go ahead.
So Bob Riley, Jeff knows this from working in Alabama. Bob Riley was former governor of Alabama. And we were working, I was at the Press Register in Mobile, and he was running, this was when he was a U.S. congressman. This is many years ago. He was a U.S. congressman, and he'd been in Washington for at least 3 or 4 terms, maybe. And he decided to run for governor. So he was coming down to the different newspapers like the Press Register to meet the editor and meet, you know, the publisher and other folks to kind of introduce himself and all that stuff. So the editor of the paper at the time, asked Bob Riley, he said, "So what's the difference between Washington and Montgomery, the legislature?" And he said, "I walked into a state senator's office in Montgomery. And then I walked in and there was this guy sitting behind the desk and he had his feet up on the desk and he was working on a laptop and computer. He came in, Bob Riley came in and said, I introduced myself, said, I'm Congressman Bob Riley, you know, I'm going to be, you know, running for governor, senator. And the guy looked up and said, oh no, I'm not the senator. I'm like a lobbyist and I'm just sitting here like using the senator's office. One of the most fascinating stories, but it's like, you know, it's pretty amazing that it's the influence that lobbyists and other interest groups have.
Jeff, you said you kind of, you know, hang out in the hall and make your rounds with your lobbyists. How'd you get to know those guys?
Back in the before time, I had a series of, I figured out who I wanted to meet and tried to go to lunch with as many of them as I could. Generally, I find that breaking bread with someone is a great way to break the ice.
Yeah, obviously that's changed a lot in this climate, although the AJC story made it sound Sunday or last week it was, I think. Maybe it was this Sunday.
It was this Sunday. Yeah, well, there's been some issues with that. There's some Republican lawmakers who haven't been around this week because maybe they got the COVID at a big lobbyist dinner. Some committees that haven't been meeting this week because their chairmen have been nowhere to be seen. So that activity may not, it is hard to break those old habits, but that activity may have a damper put on it for the rest of the session.
Interesting. Jim, I've talked to our students a little bit about the AP's RFA program, for which they hired the 17 reporters to cover capitals around the state or around the country. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as some of these reporters are graduating seniors, many of them are, but I wonder if you could just talk about the way to industry, the way to AP, what AP looks for in reporters. And both of you really, thinking back to your senior year in college, like what kind of 5 cents of free advice do you have for these young journalists entering a field that has changed drastically since we all entered it, but certainly needs them as much today as ever?
I was on mute. So we love the Report for America program. It's been really successful for us. It allowed us to add 17, strong journalists to our U.S. staff. That is a really, huge infusion of talent. I am fortunate to have 2 of those reporters work in my neck of the woods. I have Leah Willingham, who's in Mississippi, and I have Michelle Liu, who works for us in South Carolina. But that has been great. And hopefully someday maybe we can expand that. That's not really my bailiwick exactly, but I just know that we were really happy with it. And if we can try to find a way to do that down the road, it'd be great. But I do know that we are very, very happy about that. So generally the AP, so we, one of the great things about the AP, as I mentioned earlier, is that we have opportunities around the world, right? So if you are interested in some kind of, working overseas, whatever those jobs, depending on where they are, like it's really hard, I always say to people, trying to find a job in our Paris bureau is a little difficult, or our Rome bureau, because they're very popular. But we do have places all over the world. And so I always suggest to people that and this goes to what we look for in reporters, I look for people who have broad and diverse backgrounds, right? And I want, I always suggest to people that they should, being able to speak another language is a huge advantage, especially in today's, media world, right? I mean, again, the world's getting smaller. Being able to speak Spanish or French or, Mandarin or whatever it may be, Arabic, that is a huge advantage. And where you're young people and if you're still in school, or even if you're graduating and trying to find a way to take those classes, even if you graduate, find a way to do that is great. Kate Brumback, who I mentioned earlier, who works for us in Atlanta, she speaks fluent French, and she actually, speaking of the Paris Bureau, that's where she started. She started as an intern in the Paris Bureau, and she spoke fluent French, which really helped get her that gig. And she has turned that into, she has a great career at the AP. We also, as I said, we have opportunities around the country. One of the other things we look for is not just like a text journalist or not just a video journalist or a photographer. We want people that can produce content in all formats. The iPhone is a great thing for photo and video. We can produce really high content, as you know, with those tools. And so, it all goes to your diverse skills, diverse background, people who are inquisitive. I hired a temporary reporter a few years ago who actually had gone to college, was a math teacher for several years. And then he really got the journalism itch. He had always wanted to do it. And so he went back to school, to journalism school, and he became a journalist. And it was really cool because he was a math teacher. Like he had this totally different, background, but it really worked well. It was his passion. It's what he wanted to do. And so having, you're going to go out and cover all kinds of different stories. When I was a young reporter, I was working up in Massachusetts. I had to go do a story. I can't remember what it was about, but it was at MIT. Believe me, I got into journalism because they can't do math, right? The old joke. So I was like totally lost doing that story. You know what I mean? It was like, so I really believe in people that have that, different backgrounds. I mean, one of the great things about the AP is that with having people around the world, we have people of like all backgrounds, all, races, ethnicity, religious backgrounds, like just, you know, where they grew up. You know, I'm on a global news call every morning. It's at 9:15 in the morning, and that has people from all over the world. And I always have to look at what time it is. It's sort of like somebody's talking to us from like Bangkok, you know, I'm like, what time is it in Bangkok? You know, it's like 11 o'clock at night or whatever. But hearing what they're working on, the stories they're working on, and the perspective that they're working on, right, is just amazing. It every day, it really kind of inspires me, especially with, you know, COVID and what we've been dealing with and the stories we've told from around the world. And I know it's, you know, you're going into a job market, especially folks who are seniors, and you're, you know, the job market's always tight. It is, you know, in the media, it's lots of, you know, media outlets are, you know, hurting with the pandemic, and they were hurting before that. I will say the AP, because we're diversified, like I said, video is a huge growth area for us. We've been able to kind of survive that better because we have customers around the world, right? We're not just saying, ooh, our customers are all in like Metro Atlanta, right? So we need to, you know, we can, you know, so if we're hurting in one place, we're growing in another place, and it really helps us to kind of survive that. So I really believe, though, that I was speaking to some other journalism students at Auburn recently, and I told them this, you know, I know it's a scary time, like you're going out looking for jobs, but it's also a great opportunity. You have this is one of the, it's almost on the Mount Rushmore in American history, this period we're living in. You know, you got the Revolution, you got the Civil War, you've got the time between World War I and World War II, and you've got the Civil Rights era, right? And then you've got this. Like, it's one of the mileposts in American history, in the world's history, and you have an opportunity to tell that history, you know, to be part of that history, to tell those stories, and it is a great time to seize that opportunity and not be, you know, whatever. You're young and you got your whole career ahead of you, and you can be flexible, and you can go, you know, find a job where you can and learn a skill. In every job, you should try to learn another skill, right? It makes you a better journalist overall. And like I said, the opportunity to tell these stories is really impactful, because I always go back to that. It's what can we do? Stories can we tell that are impactful? So take it as an opportunity and not a scary time. Like, do you know what I mean? This is an awesome time to be a journalist. It is. And I'm amazed every day at, like I said, the stories that I see other outlets do, but also the AP. I sit on these calls with really, really smart people from around the world who are talking about stories that are just, it blows my mind some days. It really does.
Jeff, what's your 5 cents of advice for students graduating, entering the business?
My advice would be, consider being a journalist in some sort of place where there aren't very many journalists. And especially in terms of a first job, I used to tell people that there were so many stories in Mississippi that it was like they were just laying on the ground. And then in many cases, no journalist was ever going to find that story because there just weren't that many. I think if I was starting now, that I might be looking toward nonprofit outlets maybe as my first job, that I might want to go to work for somebody like the Savannah Current maybe. But I would tell you, I had the opportunity to move to Atlanta, and I'm here in large part because of family reasons. But it was always, it's never more fun than when you have hold of a story that no one else is going to get. When you have a great story and you just sort of like, no one else is competing with you, and you just get so far over the hill that no one else is ever going to catch up. And that, it is a great, 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 it is a gre it is hard to say that you don't want to live. It's hard to say you don't want to live in a big city. But I will tell you that the opportunities to tell the stories, I believe, are greater outside of the big cities.
And I can say anecdotally from some of my former graduates who ended up in small towns, some of them RFA fellows and some of them just got jobs at small news organizations. They become the most senior staffer within 2 to 3 years, and then everybody in the community knows them. And you really have an opportunity to connect with your audience in ways that you might just get, lost in a major metro market. We've been going for an hour, and I want to respect your time, gentlemen. I would like to give the students just a couple of minutes here to ask a few questions since I've dominated the conversation here. Do we have any questions for Jeff or James before we let them roll? Nothing? Alexa?
He answered every question. Wow.
Folks, I put my email in the chat. If you have specific questions about something you're working on related to the State House, I will be happy to try to answer them.
I have a question. Since you're talking about reporting in the big cities, how do you make sure that you, especially with issues that are like going to affect something statewide, how do you bring in the perspective of outside of the big city when you're so ingrained in the big city, in the capital? How do you make sure that that is represented?
A lot of that is trying to intentionally broaden your source base. The AP in Georgia, especially on the state wire, has a weird mission where it is our job to interpret Atlanta to the rest of the state and our job to interpret the rest of the state to Atlanta. It's like we're like the go-between. But you need to, when I'm writing about school stories, it'd be easy to limit myself to the 5 or 6 biggest school districts that are all in Metro Atlanta, but I try to pick up the phone and call Early County. It's just, you gotta have different perspectives. Some of that is because I have lived a lot of my life in places that are a lot more like Georgia south of the fall line, that I think I have a pretty good sense of what life in South Georgia is like. But if you have never lived in a place like that, you've got to try to broaden your source base. You got to try to find sources out there.
Darian, you had a question?
Ooh, yes. So when talking about like what the AP looks for with graduating students or students who are going to be applying, I know you talked about having a background. You gave the example of the math teacher. What do they think about students, or I guess people in general, who have like their own personal projects that they're doing, whether it's like their own stories or like their own photo stuff or like their own social media account, if it's to promote something like a social issue or like mental illness or something like that? What do you think about people who do that? It might not be writing, but it's something else.
Yeah, I think we're open to different forms of content, right? And again, it's about skill set, right? And what matches. I would say, it's the level of folks that we hire are probably not straight out of college. We have internships, we have other there are opportunities, but they're kind of limited. So sometimes you can make that jump right from college to the AP. It's pretty hard, I will say. We usually looking for folks that have a little bit more experience, but it's not, I'm not going to say it's never happened. But like I said, we do have internships. We have other opportunities, right, for people who grow. We do look for different, skill sets, like I said. So a lot of those things you're mentioning are kind of transferable. It's like, how do you transfer them, right? And that would be part of the conversation, with each person and what they're working on. Now, once you're working at the AP, clearly we want you to be working on stories for us, right? And things like that. One of the things I will say, which is very important to us, you mentioned social media, is when we hire people, we are really, and people that work for us, we want to be seen as, fair arbiters of the truth, right? And so we are very cautious about expressing personal views on social media, what people retweet, what they tweet, whatever it be on Instagram or Facebook, whatever, TikTok, whatever it may be. We kind of look through that to make, and when people that work for us, we ask them to kind of, it's part of the responsibility of your job is to put away a little bit of that, right? If you're covering, the Trump-Biden race, you can't be retweeting stuff about Joe Biden or about Donald Trump, right? Because whichever side or whatever is going to think you're unfair. And that really cuts on your credibility. So I really caution, especially people even at your age who probably have pretty deep and broad social media, presence. You need to be careful about that. You need to think about, you know what I mean? It's a fine line, but I'm just saying that's something you should think about.
Definitely. I feel like as I've gone through college more and gotten older, I feel like others too, we realize how important our digital footprint is. So.
Right. And I will say, like the AP, we are, like I said, we are like a business to business, right, company. So we, sell our content to newspapers, whatever, TV stations, radio stations, whatever, websites, stuff like that. We do not post our content. Like we don't take our stories and post them directly on Twitter, let's say. Or let's say there's a guilty verdict in like whatever, capital murder case, huge case, right? We do not put on Twitter first, hey, so-and-so was found guilty or so-and-so was found not guilty. We put it on the wire first because our customers would be like, why am I paying you to get this on the wire when you're putting it on free for Twitter and I could just grab it from there, right? So we have a little different business model. You'll see like the AJC, for example, a great newspaper. They do really wonderful work. But they have a little different business model. You'll see their reporters will tweet stuff, like they'll tweet stuff like, hey, Brian Kemp just said this, whatever it may be. We want to put that on the wire first, right? In a news story. Now we retweet our stories. Like if we have a story, then we will, you know what I mean? We'll tweet it out. But we don't break news on social media because we have a different business model than, for example, like a newspaper, or TV station or whatever. So there's some kind of nuance to how we do that.
Well, thank you so much. Your answer was super helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Gary, I think I'm going to have to cap out.
I saw you pick up your phone, Jeff. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate both of you joining us today. Students, grab their emails, reach out, network with these gentlemen. And I hope some of them are going to come stalk you down at the Capitol, Jeff.
Well, the more the merrier.
And I'm happy. Thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate it. And I put my email in there too. And really do feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help. And if you want us on another call or at some point, let us know. Like I said, we're happy to help out. So
I hope that we have a long relationship with you, and we'll definitely be in touch, and we'll send you a story once we think we got one that you're going to like, and see what you think about it, just to get your input and your thoughts. And I'm going to encourage the students to reach out to Jeff if they're struggling to source a story, just to see what he might say. So
yeah, absolutely.
We just really appreciate you coming in. Y'all have a great rest of your day, and students, take advantage of these guys' willingness to give back. And students, stay on. Faculty and students, you guys stay on so we can talk about our stories for this week.
All right, awesome. Thanks, y'all. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Okay, I think we just have our team here. Carolyn, what'd you think?
Oh, everything they said was just spot on. I was very impressed. Things haven't changed a lot at the AP since I was there either. So that's also reassuring. And if I can help if any of you have any questions that I can help you with, I'll be glad to do so.
Yeah, and I was telling
AP or about the legislature. I
was telling Jim and Carolyn prior to this that when we were doing this in Florida, if we had a story that we really hoped AP to pick up, we would call their reporter and ask them who we should be talking to and what they thought about the pitch and is there any other angle we should be considering. And that way, when we sent it to their editor, the editor oftentimes would send it to the reporter and say, hey, what do you think about this story I just got from these UF kids? And it's, oh, I talked to them about that. You should definitely move that story. I gave them advice on that. And then it just kind of helped grease the wheel a little bit to get that story out. So, you know, we're still in negotiations about having AP pick up some of our work, but I think the door is open now for you to reach out to Jeff and Jim to say, hey, I'm working on a story. This is my angle. These are the folks I thought I might reach out to. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there an angle that you might suggest that I'm not thinking about? Because then it makes them a stakeholder in your story, right? It gives them some buy-in, some skin in the game. And that can't ever hurt. And it also just broadens your network. So let's just say hypothetically 3 months from now, you're applying for an AP internship and you've been working with Jeff down at the State House. You can say, hey, can I mention your name in this cover letter that I'm writing to, the Southeast desk? And, that's how it happens. It's like, oh yeah, we saw said student down here, hustling as a senior in college, and it goes a long way.
Being able to mention a name makes all the difference in the world. And Kate and Darian, y'all are going to the Capitol on Friday. Text Jeff before you go or while you're there, and tell them you're there, and ask if y'all can meet up and get them to take you over to CLOB and show you the press area, and maybe introduce you to some of the other reporters. Reach out. The
timing is perfect. I mean, literally 2 days later, you can say, hey, we just spoke with you. Can we swing by and say hi? Can you show us around a little bit? He will do it.
He'll be glad to do it if he can. It depends on how close, what kind of deadline he's under, and that sort of thing. But if he can, I'm sure he'll be glad to do it. If you got Senate, you're going to have Senate press passes. If he's in the Senate gallery, you can meet him there. Say hi to him. Maybe follow him back over to the press office afterwards. Hang out with him for a minute. Go meet James Saucer. Tell him I said hi. That sort of thing. That'd be great.
Yeah, keep in mind when you ask Jeff, and Carolyn mentioned this, but remember their deadlines can come in the morning, they can come in the afternoon. Just be respectful. Say, hey, if you're not on deadline, would you have a few minutes to show me around? Or, obviously you wouldn't want to go to them on crossover day and say, hey, can you show me around the house today? Just remember that they may have to jump out at any point.
Exactly. Yeah. And crossover day is going to be crazy. That's for sure.
What questions do y'all have that we haven't covered already? And then we can quickly debrief about the week's production and get everybody out of here. Everything's going swimmingly? Okay.
Addison can probably give, Addison's the only one who's been to the Capitol so far, right? You can probably give Darian and Kate some tips too, since they're going on Friday.
Don't try to go through the member door.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, we were gonna create a little group thing on our Slack so we can all talk about it and actually know what to do and not just be completely lost. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, fly together so you can park together, because parking is always a huge issue.
And it's like $20 too. So.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Love that.
Be prepared.
And keep your receipts. I have an inquiry into the department head to find out how we can reimburse students. We have some funds to do so, but nobody seems to know if we're allowed to pay students, and if so, how. So I can't promise reimbursement, but keep your receipt. And then as soon as I get some clarification on that, all I can say is you have my word. If I can pay you, I will pay you back for your expenses. If the state of Georgia says I can't give money to a student in any circumstances, my hands will be tied. But I'm going to do my best to get those reimbursed for you.
Sounds good.
All right, well, podcast team, I know we'll be looking for scripts tomorrow afternoon with a deadline of 6 p.m. for script approval, hopefully. And Digital folks, I think we have a new kind of workflow for getting those stories up via Tian, Carolyn, and Kelly. Any questions from the audience and production team? Do we have a plan moving forward, Kelly and Tian?
Yeah, I was gonna say just to chime in really fast.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I know that I said to have Carolyn just Slack, myself, and Tian, but maybe just so we're covering all of our bases, if like I'm not on Slack or something, if I'm out of pocket, maybe just would be extra helpful just so we have everything covered and we're over communicative to write on the document as well. Just so we're just being completely, you know.
Kelly, I did that on the most recent, on Addison's surgery smoke story.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll try to do that.
Yeah. And that was great too, Addison, with you including all of the like the excerpts and everything and all that. That was awesome. So.
Right, and that's just a good practice, I think. When we did this at UF, a lot of times we would get stories that you'd give it a read and, you know, you'd say, hey, well, has this been approved? Oh yeah, of course it's been approved. And then you go back and check and actually it had not been approved. So I think this will just be a good redundancy. Not that any student would have nefarious intentions, but you know, at that point, the stories getting published had a grade that was hanging on it. So there was extra incentive to get it out the door. Okay. Did you have something else, Kelly, or did that address?
Yeah, just one quick thing. Once your story is approved, just maybe keep an eye on Slack because myself or Tian might message you. We were kind of bugging Addison with a few last minute things and, you know, headline changes and whatnot. So just keep that in mind.
And Kelly and Tian, I downloaded a photo from our AP news feed a couple days ago when Gwinnett and I were playing around with some things and it worked. And so it seems as though that even though our contract is supposed to start March 1st, we should have access to download assets now.
Oh,
just
cool.
keep in mind, we only get 10 a month. So I hope that we go over that 10 with stories, but we're going to have to get creative. And, you know, so if you see a photo that's a perfect fit, grab it.
Okay.
If you see a photo that doesn't really work, maybe we come up with a Creative Commons or we go to Shutterstock or go to some other options. But I just want you to know that those photos appear to be downloadable at this point.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Okay, great meeting, guys. Good luck. We'll look for those scripts tomorrow from podcast team and digital folks, or capstone folks. Just let us know when your content's ready and we'll get that moving. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.